Historian Long is well known in the Roanoke Valley for his popular writings covering local and regional history. He taught history at Roanoke College and served in the 1990s as administrator and then director of the Salem Museum. In 2015, John became Director of Education for the National D-Day Memorial Foundation in Bedford, the job he currently holds. He is responsible, he has several local history books in publication and has written for the Roanoke Times as a regular contributor. He has been a regular speaker with us here at the Historical Society of Western Virginia, where I discovered at his last visit that he and I share a common thread of preserving local Boy Scout history. His last talk with us covered the work of Roanoke Scouts during World War II. In speaking with John about tonight's lecture, I gave him every opportunity to present from his books or any other topic, and he chose to drill down into the life of an ordinary soldier at D-Day, a man who had a Roanoke connection. Many of John's Roanoke Times columns have likewise honored local veterans, especially World War II soldiers. My late father, a World War II veteran, was a big fan of tonight's speaker for that very reason. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce you to Mr. John Long.
Appreciate it. And I greatly enjoyed spending a few hours with your dad and helping to write up his story. And appreciate the warm welcome and the invitation to be here, the chance to talk about someone that it's not like he's unknown and I've just single-handedly discovered his story. It's pretty well documented, but it doesn't get enough attention, I think. And the reason is D-Day around this part of Virginia, it centers around the 116th Regiment, the Bedford Boys. And with good reason, that's an important part of the story as well, but it's not the extent of the valor, fidelity, and sacrifice of Virginians, or Roanokers in this case, on D-Day. There's a lot more to the story, and that's why when this came up, I thought I'd recently been doing some reading on the Rangers, and I thought, let me pay Lieutenant Brice a little bit of attention, partially because there's been some misrepresentation, not so much in recent years, but back, decades ago, he would be sometimes called the first Roanoker killed in the invasion, and I doubt that's true. We don't have times of when these people died, but certainly some other Roanokers had died prior to his death on Omaha Beach. And he's also been called the first officer killed in the entire invasion, which is patently untrue. I mean, a lot of paratroopers had died long before the Rangers hit the beach. But nonetheless, it's an important story of a man who did his duty, who ultimately came to a very tragic end and almost a futile end, as I'll describe. But he is certainly someone we should remember, as we should remember the Rangers on D-Day. Now, they get a good bit of attention, but most people, when they think of the Rangers, they think of Roanoke. And anyone speaks French in here, I apologize for my pronunciation, but that's close as I'm going to come. The clips that are pictured in the back of the slide here, that were seized by members of the 2nd Rangers, and epic stories of their heroism, great books written on it. If you've seen the movie The Longest Day, then they're a major character, although, as I'll talk about, it's a little bit misrepresented in my thinking of what they did and what it meant. And represented even in Saving Private Ryan. A lot of people don't realize that, unless you pay close attention, but Tom Hanks in that and his unit, they're Rangers. They weren't infantrymen, although Rangers were infantry according to the Army. But I've had people talk about him as one of the 29ers, and they weren't. In the movie, and they're all fictional characters, of course, but in the movie they were Rangers on Omaha Beach, just like Robert Brice was as well. So it's certainly worth remembering. And I'll give a little bit of biographical information about Robert Brice as we go. Here he is, a good-looking young soldier. in this picture. But we'll go back even a few years. Here he is at Jefferson High School. And I've always thought men of that era, and ladies too, of that era, they looked a lot more mature at 17 or 18 than I did at 17 or 18. Probably was a lot more mature than I was at 17 or 18. But Robert Brice was born June 26, 1921, here in Roanoke. He was the son of Claude Brice, who was a prominent local pharmacist. And I believe, I'm not sure how long this was true, but I believe his pharmacy was just up the road beside the Grand Theater, at least for a while. And so fairly, not a super rich, but a fairly prominent local family. And like all of the young Roanokers of his generation, attended Jefferson High School, played football, played very well from what I understand, graduated in 1938. And I found that interesting because I had an uncle who also graduated from Jefferson in 1938. He died when I was a teenager. I would love to have been able to ask her, I was not the mature 17-year-old who could think to ask questions, but I would love to know that they know each other. I'm sure they did because there weren't all that many students. How did he look at Robert Brice? Did they ever, hang out together? My uncle was like this tall, so he wasn't on the football team. But I'd love to know more about it, but unfortunately never thought to ask. But he graduated in 1938 from Jefferson and then went on to a goal that he apparently set during his high school years, which was to go to the Citadel. And indeed he did. He attended the Citadel, where he also played football as well. Seemed to excel. I don't know where he was in the class rankings, but he seemed to be pretty well respected. And got to his senior year, and that December, just before Christmas break, I can kind of picture, I don't have anything from Robert Brice, his memoirs or anything, but I can kind of picture what all of the cadets at the Citadel would have done on December 7th. They started looking at each other saying, where is Pearl Harbor? What's going on here? And it would slowly dawn on them through the course of the day that as cadets at a military school, destined most likely for a commission in the United States Army or Marine Corps or maybe the Navy, but it had to have dawned on them that we're going to graduate, but then we're going into a war. And at that point, the United States really is losing the war in December 1941. So how is this going to turn out? A lot of uncertainty, but certainly he was prepared for it, although he also seemed to be preparing for a legal career. When he graduated from the Citadel in 1942, he was looking into the University of Arkansas Law School as well as Syracuse, and both schools were showing some interest in him. But of course, there's a war on, and so the chance of a young cadet, graduate of a military academy, not serving in the Army is pretty remote. Maybe he would have gone on to a legal career later on. Someone mentioned to me earlier, his brother became a prominent judge in this area. But again, we will never know. Instead, he enlisted in the Army and went on to, this is him at the Citadel, incidentally. And went on to enlist in kind of a new idea for the U.S. Army, a group of what we would today call special forces. He ended up enlisting as a second lieutenant, because again he was commissioned as a graduate of the Citadel, in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, and specifically Company B of the 2nd Rangers. So that raised the question, what is the Rangers? We all know, we see in the news, we hear Rangers doing this or that, obviously some of the elite soldiers of the United States Army. Well, back in 1943, when he officially joined the Army, the Rangers were still a fairly new idea. A Ranger unit had been formed, the first Rangers, or Darby's Rangers as they're called. They had already served. They were actually some of the first Americans to shed blood in the European theater at the Canadian, usually associated with Canada, but there were Americans there too, at Dieppe. You know the story of Dieppe, when they tried to seize a port, just largely say, you know, can we do this? Can this be done? Because we're going to have to cross this channel someday. And they found out they couldn't. They were quickly chased back off the beach, the ones who weren't killed or captured. And there were American Rangers involved in that. Now, only a few, but they were there. And it was, as I said, a little bit of a controversial topic. You know, we think of today, well, obviously there's special forces, but back then there were some generals who believed, you know, all soldiers should be trained pretty much the same, maybe in different weaponry, but the same basic training. And then others, especially Lucian Truscott, who will become a prominent general, Colonel Darby, who's going to command the 1st Ranger Division, Darby's Rangers. They encouraged the Chief of Staff, George C. Marshall, and who was at that point one of his main lieutenants, a young fellow by the name of Dwight David Eisenhower, convinced them that we should have a special ranger unit, or a special trained unit based on the British commandos, which, as I said, at that point the Army did not really have. The British commandos had been designed to be very versatile, fast-moving, smaller than a normal infantry division, but extremely well-trained and able to take on special tasks, special assignments that a normal infantry unit wouldn't be able to. So these, and again, they're going to be the elite of the Army, to the point that some generals are grousing about this. You're taking all of the good soldiers out of the infantry divisions, and you're putting them in this Ranger battalion. And technically, as I said earlier, the official name of the 2nd Rangers was the 2nd Ranger Infantry Battalion. Usually infantry gets dropped out of that, but the whole point was that they would be infantry. They would just be very fast moving. They would be able to climb cliffs like I showed you before. They would be able to seize important strongholds, raid enemy positions, and bring back information or bring back prisoners or free POWs. They would be, again, just elite soldiers, and they would be elite soldiers because they were so well trained. Found a description of a 2nd Ranger in another company, in Dog Company, D Company. Excellent book here on the ones who actually did climb the cliffs. And this is unnamed soldier, but I suspect it was Sergeant Leonard Linnell who said this, quote, "What they really tried to do was destroy us. They wanted to see what the human body and the human mind could handle. We were psychologically young men, chosen young men, volunteers. All Ranger training was the toughest the armchair generals could make it. I felt that combat was a piece of cake as compared to the training." And so that's what Robert Brice and his brothers in arms are going to go through as they prepare. Now, before we get into their role, I do want to highlight one other little known fact about Rangers at D-Day, and that's the fact that although I call Robert Brice Roanoke's D-Day Ranger, there were some others, at least 2 other Roanokers that I know of, who were trained as Rangers, although not acting in a Ranger capacity on D-Day, and they were members of the 29th Division, and specifically of a unit called the 29th Rangers. So in England, some members of the 29th were invited to go and join this elite unit to train for special operations. Given the opportunity, they thought, to get in the war earlier, and so they were given this job and trained in Scotland by British commandos and by some veterans of Darby's Rangers to be Rangers on D-Day. No idea at that point what exactly Rangers were going to do on D-Day, but they thought we're going to need a bunch of them. Now fast forward to the end of 1943, they've been training for about 10 months at that point, extremely well trained, extremely fit, and Eisenhower's staff suddenly decided, we really don't need more Rangers. Send those guys back to the 29th Division. And so they were just folded back into the previous infantry positions, and nonetheless highly trained for this, extremely physically fit, and some of them would say, you know, that made a big difference in the beach on D-Day for the 116th Regiment especially. And if you recognize a couple of these guys, this is Clarence Huffman, who was a Roanoke. We have a few of his artifacts in our collection. He trained as a 29th Ranger. Anybody recognize that guy? That's Bob Slaughter. Bob Slaughter was a 29th Ranger, and there's getting rope training in Scotland with Captain Bill Holland was the captain of the 29th Rangers. But again, he didn't actually end up serving as a Ranger. He was just an infantryman on D-Day. But if Bob were here, he would tell you what I learned in all that training probably was responsible for my survival that day. And I mention them, by the way, because the Rangers of World War II were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, I think it was last year. And that included the 29th Rangers. So these guys, not only Robert Brice and the 2nd Rangers, or the 5th Rangers, or the 1st, or some equivalent companies or battalions in the Pacific, but also the 29th Rangers that were only short-lived are included in that. And so gold medal winning soldiers during that time. Okay, so let's get back then to Robert Brice and the 2nd Rangers and what their job is going to be. What's going to center around this promontory right here that you saw in the picture earlier. I'll show you another picture in a little while. And that is Pointe-du-Hoc. It's a little cliff that juts out right in between Omaha Beach right here and Utah Beach, which is over here more or less. And what we had discovered in preparations for this invasion, that by the way everyone knew was going to happen. No one knew, except for top brass, no one knew where or when it would happen, but everyone from Hitler down to the dimmest private in the German army knew that sometime we're going to have to cross the channel, and they were preparing for it. And one way they're preparing for it was by putting some big guns on here, the high ground above what's going to be the battlefield, or potentially battlefield. Many places we could land, but it was considered by a lot of German generals that we're going to land either at Calais, where the channel is the narrowest, or we're going to land at Normandy, where the beaches are acceptable. You know, a lot of the rest of the English Channel they were defending, but they were not as promising a landing spot. And so up on top of these cliffs, we knew there were German gun emplacements. There was a German presence, and those German guns could hit Omaha Beach, they could hit Utah Beach, they could hit ships in the channel. In other words, they could be a game changer. And just like any cadet at a military school can tell you, in a battle you need to seize the high ground. Lee learned that at Gettysburg, right? You've got to have the high ground if you're going to succeed. And Pointe-du-Hoc is the high ground above what's going to become the American beaches at Omaha and Utah. Somebody has to take those out. We're going to bomb them. We're going to shell them from naval ships. But ultimately, there have to be some American combat boots at the top of Pointe-du-Hoc, making sure the German guns have been neutralized, the German presence is out of the way, and that is the job that's given to the 2nd Rangers. Specifically, companies D, E, and F of the 2nd Rangers are going to land at the base of these cliffs. They're going to climb the cliffs, which are about 100 feet where they land, and not vertical like our sculpture at the memorial, ends, but still pretty steep. It's not going to be an easy job. Meanwhile, what about the rest of the 2nd Rangers? Companies A and B, and remember Robert Brice is in B Company, they are to be held in reserve and will either climb the cliffs if they're needed, or they will be diverted to Omaha Beach and land with the infantry, with the 116th, so with Bob Slaughter, with the Bedford Boys, and worked their way around from Omaha Beach up here to attack Quanticook from the rear. So the idea is we may need them climbing the cliffs and helping out companies D, E, and F, or we may need them doing this flanking maneuver and enveloping the Germans. We don't know. We've got to be flexible, and that's what Rangers are trained to be, flexible. And so that's the job of companies A and B, while D, E, and F climb the cliffs. A and B are held in reserve. Company C, incidentally, and the entire 5th Ranger Battalion is assigned to Omaha Beach. They're going to land on the beach, and they're also going to, actually they're supposed to land a little bit farther over here, closer to Quanticook per se, but they are also supposed to come up and reinforce the Rangers at Quanticook. So that's how they're all distributed. That's why I said earlier, it's really the vast majority of Rangers don't climb the cliffs at Quanticook. They're sent other ways around to play a big part in all of this, but that's what they're supposed to do. Now, how is Robert Brice, as the head of a battalion on D-Day, how is he supposed to know which one they're going to do? Well, the idea is that the American Rangers climbing Quanticook, when they get to the top, they will send either a radio message or signal lamps to the ships, who will then radio it. One of two messages. One would be, the code word was tilt, which meant that we have failed. We do not hold the cliffs. Do not send anyone else here. Tilt means, we failed. We lost. The other message, code word, was praise the Lord. And the message praise the Lord is broadcast, then it means we do hold the cliffs. We have climbed and successfully, maybe not neutralized the Germans, but there's another code word that we have to disable the guns that they're supposed to, the 6 big guns. And that's what the idea would be. So Robert Brice and his units, they will listen for this message, and then they will know their assignment, whether we are crossing the beaches or whether we are climbing the cliffs. And I picture them as hoping to climb the cliffs. They were ready for that. This was the ambition of every one of these soldiers. They had trained so heavily for it. And I say that because of another dog company soldier, by the name of Tony Ruggiero, whose boots we have in our collection. So these are actual Ranger boots from D-Day, belong to a New Yorker by the name of Tony Ruggiero, who is a major character in this book, which I highly recommend if you want to know more about the Rangers. But he was on a landing craft coming to the cliffs, which hit a mine and sank. And he spent the day treading water in this freezing, English Channel. Eventually picked up, taken back to England, although they lobbied to be, turn around, take us back to Quanticook, we'll climb those cliffs. Well, Tony Ruggiero, like 3 or 4 days before he gets back to Normandy by then, the fight has moved inland, the beaches are secure, but you know what he does with those boots? He climbs the cliffs. He says, I trained to do it, I'm going to go climb those cliffs. And so he climbed Quanticook several days after the battle was finished, just because that's what he set out to do and he was determined to do it. And that's why I say Robert Brice, if we could ask him, my guess he would say, I really wanted to be called in and climb the cliffs, but he does not get the opportunity. Now in late May, all of the invasion force, infantry, the engineers, the tankers, in this case the Rangers, they are called to special isolation areas on the South English Channel coast that they got nicknamed sausages, because on a map they were sort of shaped like sausages. And so they're called into the sausages, where they are really treated well. They're fed phenomenally, far better than they'd eaten for a long time, far better than British citizens are eating at that point, like ice cream, every night and this sort of thing. They are briefed repetitively about the terrain, about the landmarks of Normandy, but they are not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to send any mail or receive any mail, and they're not even allowed to tell their loved ones at home prior to this that they're going to be out of communication, because the last thing we want is the Germans to intercept a sack of mail somewhere and realize what units are involved in the invasion. So in mid-May, May 16th, Robert Brice writes home what turns out to be his last letter. He writes, "Dear folks, we got up at 3:30 a.m. yesterday morning, went out on a problem, which means training, and didn't get back until 8:30 p.m. By the time we were finished taking care of our equipment, it was 11:30. So you can really see we're kept rather busy. The morning we got up so early, the planes came near, and between the sirens and the firing, we didn't get much sleep. But it was a good show. I don't know how regularly my mail is getting through, but if there are breaks, don't worry, because I'll write whenever I can." I think he's sort of telling them, without telling them, because he wouldn't be allowed to tell them, "I'm going to be out of communication." I think he's revealing that to his parents at home. "I'm in good health, but naturally miss Virginia and you folks. I'm sorry Mother feels badly, and hope she feels better. I don't think much about Jim leaving BMI until called. Apparently his brother, James, was at BMI and debating dropping, or not dropping out, but leaving to enlist, and he doesn't think that's a good idea. He says, finish BMI. Well, I got no chance. So there's no disgrace for an 18-year-old to be called from his books when he is needed, but he is not needed before that. And so, love to all, Bob." And so that's the last letter he sends home to his family. And he also kept a diary, and I found a description. Actually, Jim Brice gave a copy of this, this one entry to the memorial many years ago. And he writes on his last diary entry, I don't know the date, but I'm guessing it's probably June 4th or 5th, quote, "Must pack up my diary according to orders," because of course he wouldn't be allowed to carry a document like that into battle in case he's captured. "Must pack up my diary according to orders. No one can say what will happen when we hit those beaches. The chips are down, but I have full confidence in these men," he wrote about his Company B. So we know a little bit about what he was thinking as he got ready for the invasion. Sorry about that. It's the time of year for me to get coughs and sniffles and things, but as the leaves begin to change. So what actually happens? That's the plan for the 2nd Rangers. What actually happens, let me show you a little bit of the landscape, because I just happened to get a chance to go to Normandy about this time last year. It was about 2 weeks ago last year. And so there is Pointe de Hoc from a little bit of a distance. This is where the, has anyone been there? Some of you, very impressive. It's a little bit different. The first time I went, you really just, got out of the bus and you went and wandered around. And now it's much more controlled. They're worried about erosion. It really has eroded a lot compared to World War II pictures. It's, you follow a path now. You stay on the path. You can't run up and down the big craters like you could back the first time I ever visited. But still, it's a very impressive place to visit. But remember, Robert Brice very likely is going to land on Omaha Beach, what becomes Omaha Beach. So here's a shot looking back in the direction toward Pointe de Hoc, and I just didn't get a very good shot of the beach when I was there, partially because you notice the tide is in. Of course, they land at low tide on D-Day, so picture the water, a couple hundred yards farther out. The tide, while I was there, just happened to be high tide. So I don't see it, but looking the other way, you can see a little bit more of the beach, but again, be hundreds of yards they have to cross when they get out of their landing craft before they get to the seawall, which wasn't quite this elaborate in 1944, but that's what's there now. I did like the picture. It does probably look a lot like the weather on D-Day, though. So that's what they are preparing to do, and their job is to get into landing craft, specifically LCAs. And here's a picture of an LCA. Now this is a little bit different than what we usually think of with D-Day, the LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel, or most people call them the Higgins boats, with the drop-down ramp in the front. The LCA was the British version, very good engine, reliable, not fast. These things are not speedboats like you see in the movies. You're going like 10 or 12 miles an hour as you come up to the beaches with the Germans shooting at you. But it has a slightly different bow and gate in and out of it. So say the LCAs are a little bit different than what we see in the movies with American Higgins boats, but still same basic idea. It can come right up to the beach, right up to the water's edge, and land. Now, if Company B is called to climb the cliffs, they will land at the foot where there is, by that time, not much beach left. They are just a few yards as the tide comes in, but then climb the cliffs. One thing that's very much complicated, you don't see that today if you visit, is that the air power and the Navy had been shelling Pointe du Hoc quite a bit in the previous days, actually days leading up to it, but certainly in the morning of D-Day, they were hitting that thing with everything they got, and the result was they had knocked a huge landslide of rock down to the base of the cliffs. And so they had to land across the beach that's there, which again is fairly narrow. It had been hit by shells as well, which means there were big, deep craters, often filled with water. And then a big pile of rocks they got to climb before they get to the cliff. So it was no easy job. That's what Robert Brice is thinking. Or he's going to land on Omaha Beach in his LCA and have to cross the beach under heavy fire. Now, before we get to Robert Brice, what's happening actually at Pointe du Hoc with companies D, E, and F? The answer is they land. They are able to climb the cliffs, even though so much went wrong. Let's use this picture. There it is. They were supposed to land over on this side at, I forget what time, but early, and start climbing the cliffs before the Germans could realize what had happened. Because of the tide in the English Channel and some navigation error by the British sailors who were on their LCAs, they landed up at Pointe de la Perce, or they started heading to Pointe de la Perce, which is a little bit farther over here. Something else, they're going to have to seize that area, but it didn't have the German guns. And I hope that their whole point is the German guns up there. And so when Colonel Rudder realizes it, he orders the landing craft to head this direction back toward Pointe du Hoc. And because they're coming from this area, they land here instead of over on the other side where they planned. But no matter, they're going to climb those cliffs. And so they shoot rope ladders up off grappling hooks on ropes. Have one, what was adapted from the London Fire Department, a ladder that was going to kind of be extended and then fall over there. And there was actually a soldier, a ranger, up on top of that ladder, swaying back and forth, shooting the Germans. I would love to see that guy in action someday. But they're going to climb this thing under extreme fire. They are late because they had that diversion. They're on the wrong side, and yet they're going to get up there and they're going to do what they were called to do. They get up to the top. They begin to take out Germans, seize bunkers, chase off counterattacks. But remember, they're there for the guns, and so some of them head up here looking for the guns, get to the gun emplacements and realize they are not there. The guns were not in their emplacements. Now, this is, the way this story is told in the book The Longest Day and then in the movie The Longest Day, is that they wasted their effort. We did all this for nothing, and that's really unfair to the 2nd Rangers, because they got to the gun emplacements, they are empty. Why? Because the Germans, they were under attack. They knew the Navy was shelling us, the Air Force is going to bomb us. These guns are too valuable. We got to get them out of here so they're not targets. They had dragged them back half a mile or so back here and hidden them in a copse of trees. The Rangers who got to the gun emplacements, they didn't sit down and say, boy, this was for nothing. They said, okay, where are the guns? Look at these tracks heading back. Let's follow that. And so they found those guns within, I don't know, half hour or so, and destroyed them with thermite grenades, basically rendered them inoperable. And the Germans could have brought them up. If not for the 2nd Rangers, the Germans would simply have to drag them up here into the gun emplacements and start firing at Omaha Beach, start firing at Utah Beach, hitting ships in the channel. It would have been a game changer. So this idea that the Rangers were wasted really, as I say, is unfair to what actually happened. Now, so they do, and then by the way,
how many in one of those groups?
A company as smaller than an infantry company is only like 70 or 80 men. So there were 225 Rangers who made it to the top of the cliffs by the next day, and they hold the cliffs against repeated German counterattacks for 2 days before they get any reinforcements. I think there are 74 of them still able to bear arms at that point. So let's say they weren't all killed, many wounded, but and they were slightly reinforced, like some paratroopers landed in the wrong place and they just joined the Rangers. Why not? Got to fight somebody. So and a few soldiers were able to get to Pointe du Hoc, but for the most part, they're standing alone and say they are certainly great heroes. Some of you, if you're old as I am, might remember President Reagan's 1984 Boys of Pointe du Hoc speech. If you haven't, look it up on YouTube. It's just a great speech and a great tribute to these guys when there were still some of them there to receive the accolades, and they did. It was just a great moment when they were standing right up here at the time where that speech took place. Just look that up sometime if you haven't heard it in a while. So they achieved their mission, which was to make sure those German guns weren't brought to bear against the invasion. It cost them greatly, great heroism, but ultimately a successful mission. Now, what about Robert Brice? Remember, their job is to either climb those cliffs, if that's what the order is, or proceed on to Omaha Beach and try to make it back around the other way to attack Pointe du Hoc from the rear. Well, as they're getting close to the time that message is supposed to be sent, which is 7 a.m., they have heard nothing. They can see nothing from where they are. It's a misty, kind of foggy day. They know a lot of fighting is going on up there, but they have no idea if this is, if they've been repulsed, if the Germans have won, if they have won. They're waiting for the message, either tilt, which means we failed, or praise the Lord, we have succeeded, but they hear nothing. Their orders were to go in at 7 o'clock if they've heard nothing. They wait until 7:15. They give a 15-minute grace period because they know their brothers up there on top of the cliffs might need them. But at 7:15, the decision is made, and you picture their mindset. Our fellow Rangers must have been slaughtered. They have not achieved their mission, so it's all up to us now. We've got to land at Omaha Beach, and you've seen Saving Private Ryan. You know what Omaha Beach was like. We've got to land and make our way over to Pointe du Hoc and do what we can against the Germans there and against the guns. They eventually do, by the way, but it takes about 2 days before those reinforcements show up. Meanwhile, by the way, and the reason the message was not sent is a little bit of confusion over exactly why, But best explanation is, remember, they're late even to get to the base of the cliffs. And then it's a much harder fight to get up the cliffs because of that. So it was after 7:15 before Colonel Rudder can send his message. He does eventually send the message, praise the Lord. We have made it to the top. We are still fighting, but we're on our way to victory. And the other message, which was something 6, bang 6 or something like that, which means we have destroyed the guns as well, which obviously, all the top brass are going to want to know that those guns have been taken out. And then they send a message which is, we need reinforcements. Only be told the Rangers have landed. They've already landed at Omaha Beach because they hadn't heard the message from you. And you can imagine how crestfallen you might be to realize we have no reinforcements. This is us. And yet those Rangers kept it up for 2 days, continually beating back German counterattacks, continually holding the high ground, and ultimately, as I say, they made a great success. Now, what about Robert Brice? Well, he is part of the 1st Battalion of Company B there to land, and they have a hard time figuring out exactly where to land because of all the chaos that's going on Omaha Beach, and because of the German defenses that would tear the bottom out of the landing craft as the tide is coming in. Those are being submerged, and so they end up landing slightly wrong place. It was really the only place they could land. And the Rangers, who are able to get out of the landing craft and across the beach and survive that experience, rally and help to rally the men of the 29th Division, who had also landed. And the story goes that General Norm Coda, who was the assistant divisional commander for the 29th, and he is doing everything he can. He's a man who, in my opinion, deserves the Medal of Honor for what he did on D-Day. Didn't get it. Movement is ongoing and has been for a while to have it awarded to him. But at any rate, General Coda comes across a group of Rangers. I think they were 5th Rangers, not 2nd. And he says, "Who are you guys?" And they're just taking cover. And they say, we're Rangers, sir. And it says, well, Rangers, lead the way. And those Rangers get up, and the exit off of the beach, they help the 29th Division to seize. And so we pay a lot of attention, obviously, here in this part of Virginia, to Company D, Bob Slaughter's company of the 116th, to Company A, which is almost decimated on D-Day, the Bedford Boys, Company B from Lynchburg, all the rest of them. We pay a lot of attention to them, but the success that they get at very high cost is attributable also to the fact that the Rangers are there. But sadly, not Robert Brice. And I've already told you, he dies on D-Day. This is from a book called Rudder's Rangers, which tells a little bit of the story of what happened to Robert and to Company B. As the boats crept closer to shore, machine gun fire and explosions were more evident. The enemy's accuracy improved, and small arms of machine gun bullets began hitting the Rangers' boats. The shore grew larger, and the Rangers could clearly see the beach and terrain forward. They were following in on the 1st Battalion of the 116th, and that's Company A, B, and C, so Charlottesville, Lynchburg, and Bedford. Although another misconception a lot of people have about the 116th is that they were all local Virginia boys. Remember, there'd been a draft, so there were men from all over the country in those. They weren't all Virginia National Guardsmen. Now, the Corps, the non-coms are really important. They are. A lot of the officers are, but many of the privates and corporals, they're from wherever. They've been drafted and trained into the 29th. Anyway, they were following in on the 1st Battalion of the 116th, and now Lieutenant Colonel Schneider, he's in charge of this force of Rangers. Lieutenant Colonel Schneider could see that conditions on Dog Green were bad indeed. He swung his flotilla to the east toward Dog White Beach, the east going away from Pointe du Hoc, so he's only adding to the distance after cover. Lost my place here. To the east toward Dog White, trying to avoid the enemy's strong point, which men of the 116th had apparently hit. A and B companies, so Robert Brice, of the 2nd Rangers were still going to go in on the edge of Dog Green. Suddenly, B Company's 2nd Platoon LCA hit a mine, and the front landing ramp was blown off. The seaman holding the cable to let down the ramp was killed instantly. Lieutenant Fitzsimmons was hit by the door and knocked unconscious. He was left for dead as the other 34 Rangers jumped from the boat and swam to shore. And bear in mind, they're carrying 60 to 80 pounds of equipment as they're trying to swim through the high tide of the English Channel. Lieutenant Robert M. Brice commanded the 1st Platoon of B Company. There had been no problems on his craft, no waters, no hits. Now the crew was taking the boat all the way to shore until stopped by iron and steel obstacles. Ordering the ramp lowered, Lieutenant Brice jumped into the water just over his knees. He struggled in the water, plunged forward, and became the first man of his craft to reach the beach. Turning, he yelled to his men, "Let's go." Then a burst of enemy machine gun fire raked him across the chest, and the young lieutenant died where he fell. So he only got a few steps into France and had no further involvement in D-Day. So I say he's Roanoke's D-Day Ranger, certainly a great hero, but no impact on the outcome of the day. It's his other fellow Rangers, the men of the 116th, the 1st Division on the other side of the 116th, that are going to make the difference at Omaha Beach. Now what they do, as I said earlier, the remainders of B Company and C Company, they help break through the German defenses. They get out into the back hinterland. They make their way this way. It takes them 2 days to do it, fight through the German defenses, eventually get to Pointe du Hoc to help to relieve what's left of companies D, E, and F up at the top. So again, they accomplished their mission, just took longer and it was a lot harder than they anticipated, but they made a difference. Sadly, Robert Brice could never be one of them. And his D-Day story, as I say, was a few steps long before he's hit by enemy fire and killed. Here is a obituary for him. I don't think it's from the Roanoke paper. I think it might be from something in Columbia, but telling that he was killed on the morning of the invasion day, that he was a graduate. And also, I should have mentioned, incidentally, while he was a student at the Citadel, he met a South Carolina girl by the name of Bessie Rumph, R-U-M-P-H, and ended up marrying her before he shipped out. I don't know how long they were married, but couldn't have been, very many days they had together before he is shipped out to Ranger training at Fort Benning and then to England. And she's left as now a war widow, one of many war widows created by D-Day. How's he remembered? Well, this is the Ranger Memorial at the top of Pointe du Hoc, overlooking the channel. Again, I like these pictures because I think this is a lot way it looked on D-Day, minus obviously the memorial. Nearby, there is this plaque listing the killed of the 2nd Rangers, and you can't read it, but Robert Brice is in this. And then this sign I found at the top of Pointe du Hoc on one of the paths going along. There are several of these signs telling the story and telling the story of individual soldiers. And here I am just going along looking at these, and look, someone from my hometown who lived over on Northampton, not too far from where I grew up. And here he is being heralded as one of the men and telling the basic story that he only got a couple of steps into France trying to rally his men. And I thought that was interesting, that he is remembered maybe more extensively in Normandy than he is here in Roanoke in a lot of ways. At the D-Day Memorial, we have his name on one of our plaques, necrology plaques, alongside 2,501 other brothers in arms who died on D-Day, and then on the other side of the memorial, 1,914 allies who died on D-Day. And I'll give you a little hint. I don't know if I'm authorized to get this or not, but if all goes well, for the 80th anniversary next year, we're going to add names to the wall. We have found several of the people who should be there. A few men that shouldn't be on the wall. We'll have to take their names off because they died not on D-Day, or on D-Day but somewhere else, not in Normandy. But anyway, we're going to add probably about 12 American names and 5 or 6 British and Canadian names to the wall. So the research to honor these men is still ongoing. But Robert Brice is right here on plaque W48, and always will be as long as we're open. And then not too far away, we have our plaque for the 2nd Rangers, right next to a plaque for the 5th Rangers, telling their story as well. Sadly, it concentrates mostly on the guys on Pointe-du-Hoc. The ones on Omaha Beach just get left out of the story too often. Another reason why I wanted to tell Robert Brice's story to a hometown crowd. And then finally, where is he remembered? At Normandy American Cemetery, where his grave is there among hundreds of others killed on D-Day. And this flag and the portrait of him, that's South Citadel Alumni Association put that there, as near as I can tell. So if you're ever in Normandy, get to go to the cemetery. My advice, and I've never been able, I've been to Normandy 3 times, never been able to spend nearly enough time in the cemetery. I would love to just spend the afternoon there, but you're always in a hurry. The tour guide is always saying, come on, get on the bus. But if you get a chance, stop by, and there is Robert Brice, man from your hometown. Stop by and pay your respects alongside, let's say, many, many other Virginians who died on D-Day. So that's the story of Robert Brice. I'll hold it there and take any questions that you have.
Yep. 2 questions. One, is this Robert Brice, the Judge Brice family?
Yes.
Okay.
That's his brother.
That's his brother. Thank you. And the other is, do you recall the gist of that interpretive plaque there? Why was it at Omaha? Why was it at Pointe-du-Hoc and not at Omaha? And that's where he died. I'm sort of curious.
Well, they're trying to tell the whole Ranger story,
okay,
in these interpretive plaques, which are very unfortunate, by the way. April, the president, we were standing there looking at it and saying, why did they do them this way? The colors are just awful. You couldn't read the thing. Like underneath, you can kind of see a little bit. It collects water, condensation, which makes it even harder to read. But it says, First Lieutenant Robert Brice and the rest of the company, being the 2nd Rangers, landed at Omaha Beach after being diverted from Pointe-du-Hoc. After struggling through the surging waves, Brice ran toward the seawall, where men in the first waves were seeking protection from German fire. Before he arrived, he was killed by a burst of machine gun fire. Brice is buried at Normandy American Cemetery, Plot J, row 11, grave 16. And then a quote it's from Roosevelt's D-Day prayer alongside. So the quotes don't always have anything to do with the thing. But, and then over on this side, same thing in French. So it's kind of unfortunate the way they did it in terms of readability, but I thought it was nice. And they've really done a good job in Normandy of paying tribute to these guys. So if you drive along the coast, up above the beach, the main road through there, one is called, in fact, the draw off of Omaha Beach is called Avenue de Bedford, Virginia. So it's, Bedford, Virginia Avenue. But they also have banners hanging up all along with pictures of a lot of these, including a lot of Virginians.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I always thought it real interesting, John, that the Germans had fields of fire. So they knew, where they were going to be shooting. And one of the German guys that was a machine gunner, they had this MG-42. That was a machine gun. It was just a solid brick like that.
Sounded like a sewing machine.
But he had an extra barrel, a water cooler, and he had somebody bringing him ammo all morning long. He doesn't know, this guy had never killed anybody. He was a farmer.
A lot of them were.
So he knew he had a job to do. He was captured, later captured, and sent over here in a prisoner of war camp. He was a model prisoner. After the war, he goes back to his farm in Germany. I think a real good story.
It's another of the stories of World War II that's not well enough known around here is that there were 2 German prisoner of war camps in the Roanoke Valley. One in Salem, which was more like a barracks than a camp, and then one at, can't think of the name of the church camp, but it's in Catawba. It's a current church, currently owned by a church and used as a camp.
Let me tell you real quick, another interesting story. My dad had a bum foot, but he was able to join what they called the Minutemen back then. So this German prisoner had escaped. And this was out off of old Route 11 going out where Walmart is out.
Okay.
Well, Dad was walking down there with his shotgun. And one of his buddies was further on down the field, and he sees my dad coming up through the orchard. Well, he shouldn't have done it. I mean, he jumps out at my dad and scares the dickens out of my dad. And it was a story that he liked to tell a lot. Anyway.
There were a few escapes, German POW on the loose. But I think overall, when there were escapes like that, they wanted to get out of the camp for a little while, walk around, stretch their legs, maybe get a beer, talk to a girl. You know, they weren't really trying to escape, because where are they going to go? They're in Virginia. It's a long swim back to Germany. I mean, any other questions? Yep.
Yeah, I mentioned my uncle Charles McNulty. He went in and he saw the movie Saving Private Ryan. That was B+3. That's the day he hit Normandy. And he went in as a corporal. 2 weeks later, as a second lieutenant. And that tells you what the attrition was. You know, the number of men who were taken out.
Oh, very true. And that's one of the sad stories is what happens to replacements. Because we've got to have a lot of replacements. The 29th Division, soon after D-Day, it was said that there was a division in the field, there was a division in the hospital, there was a division in the cemetery. And there were, you know, hundreds and hundreds of men in the 29th who were new to combat. And experienced soldiers like Bob Slaughter, they wanted to train them, they did what they could, but they were a little bit leery about getting too close to him because this guy might be gone tomorrow. We had 3 other privates last week, and we didn't have time to learn their names. So it was really tough for these replacements to try to get. Again, something else I'd love to be able to ask my uncle. He was a clerk at a replacement depot in the Pacific. I would love to find out, but what he did, what happened, why these men. But I had the same story. Gosh, even worse in the Pacific sometimes.
I've got one last question about the 12-mile-an-hour British boats, LSAs, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
How many days in advance do they have to leave to get over there for that to time it just right?
Well, they are taking on troop transports on davits.
Okay.
And it's about 10, 12 miles off the shore
Very
that
good.
they lower down. It's still like a 3 or 4 hour
So
trip.
those transports are transported closer in. That makes
And,
a lot more sense.
and you've got to, if you're Bob Slaughter, you've got to either climb down rope ladders into this thing, or you've got to get into the landing craft while it's hanging from the davits and then be lowered down, which, depends on the skill of the sailors that are lowering it. And that's just a scary problem. We lost men on D-Day just trying to get in the landing craft.
So many logistical issues. Anything else coming up for you, either personally or the D-Day Memorial?
Well, of course, our next big event is, well, we have Scout Day coming up in October 14th. So bring your Scout troops out, but Boy and Girl Scouts, incidentally. Both programs for both. But Veterans Day will be our next big event with a big crowd, hopefully, if the weather cooperates. And our speaker will be Major General Marie Eder, who's written a book called The Women Who Stepped Out of Line, I think is the title of it, about women heroes in World War II. And she's going to be a great speaker. And then, of course, not far away is the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and it's going to be a spectacular commemoration.
How many people left?
How many D-Day veterans? You know, I know of one D-Day veteran in this area. I'm not saying there aren't any some others, there very easily could be some I've never heard of, but a sailor in Reiner by the name of Ernest Fulcher was only like 17 years old on D-Day on a patrol boat. And he's the only man I know of from this part of Virginia still living. Now, elsewhere there are D-Day veterans alive. Obviously they're over 100 or getting close to 100. Can't travel as much. Often their hearing or their just mental faculties have degraded that you can't really talk to them as much. But I always tell students all the time when they come, if you get to meet a World War II veteran, take the opportunity. Go over there, if they have their World War II veteran hat on, go over there, shake their hand, ask them where they served. You may not get a long conversation, but you will remember that you met World War II veterans. Because your kids will never have that opportunity.
John, we want to thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you.
That concludes tonight's lecture. I want to remind you to go home straight away and log on to the RoanokeHistory.org and get your History is Served tickets. So there you have it. See y'all next month, the fourth Tuesday of the month for Nelson Harris. Thank y'all very much for coming.